People don't understand about children. It is not what you leave to them that makes them great. It's what you leave in
Now,
them.
I've come on here and told y'all several times about several stories. And the stories that I've told y'all in my car, in my kitchen, in my living room, and even in my bathroom. But never, ever, ever have I ever told y'all a bedtime story. So this story here is a bedtime story. And see, because I was thinking, and I always tell y'all, my stories come when I least expect it. Now, keep in mind, I've told y'all several times about my granddaddy, which my granddaddy was the shit. But every good man, well, we can't say good man, but we're going to say man, there is always, always, always a good woman. And this story, my loves, is the story about Flora. Flora and Fred are my grandparents. Flora is my grandma. And in this story, listen to me. I don't care what anybody says. Your grandma is your grandma. And you accept her the way she is. So like, comment, and subscribe. And let's get ready to find out. Now, because my grandma was like a regular grandma, if you seen her, you would think that my grandma was like just a grandma. She always had blue or purple hair. And she got her hair curled every Saturday. And my grandma wore fancy dresses, big hats, jewelry, all this other stuff. But my grandma was no punk bitch. Keep in mind, her kids is my aunts and uncles. Her daughter is my mother. So therefore, Flora wasn't going. Okay, but see, I have told y'all in another story that my granddaddy was mean to my grandma. And he was. He would always get his chance to try to hit my grandma. But regardless of the fact, because they grew up in a different time than what we did, my grandma stayed with him. But because she stayed with him, listen to me, even though she knew he was wrong in a lot of things, she would not go for you messing over Fred. If you came for Fred, you couldn't mess over Fred. Now keep in mind, I'm up here in my bedroom, as you can see, and I'm getting ready for bed because I had some exciting news. Now I have to tell y'all that in another story, but we're going to have us a nightcap. And the best way to have a nightcap is with this apple crown. Oh my God, it's a sample size. So we're going to go ahead and drink this while we're telling this whole story. Now, see, my grandma and granddaddy worked at the junkyard. Even though grandma didn't do anything, she still got a little paycheck because she was there at the junkyard with him. But see, when you see him, you see her. When you see her, you see him. He wasn't too far behind her, and she wasn't too far behind him. Now, keep in mind, people in the neighborhood knew my grandmother and them. But the new people that was moving into that neighborhood where my granddaddy's junkyard was, they didn't know my grandparents. They didn't know my parents. They didn't know their kids. They didn't know that they were psycho. They didn't know that they started DNA with the crazy people. They didn't know this. So these boys, this family had moved in this neighborhood. And because they moved in this neighborhood, they did not know my grandparents. My grandma always, my granddaddy, he did a lot of stuff for my grandma. But he always kept her in a brand new car. When I say a brand new car, he didn't give a damn how much he had to pay for it. He went up there, cashed it out, so grandma was hush grandma, but he wouldn't do it. Listen to me. She had to have a brand new car. They was watching my grandmother and my granddaddy for weeks. These boys have been watching them. But see, my grandma ain't stupid. My grandma and my granddaddy, every time they got ready to lock up the junkyard, there would be him, her, and they both boys. Dumb and Dumber would be with them. 9 times out of 10, Dumb and Dumber locked the gates, let the dogs out, and walked grandma and granddaddy to their car. But every now and again, my granddaddy would shut the junkyard down late. So that would leave him and grandma down the junkyard because they was by themselves. That's what they thought. These boys actually thought my grandparents was by themselves. Now, I got to let y'all know exactly how my grandparents looked. My granddaddy had all white hair, and it stuck up like Don King's hair, but it was curly, and it stuck out. But my grandma had short hair, and either it was blue or it was purple. It was never black or white. If her hair was white, it was super white. But every now and again, she would wear it like that, but she wouldn't. But my grandma always had on jogger pants, a shirt, and winter boots, and the jogger pants was inside the winter boots in the summertime. My granddaddy, on the other hand, always wore overalls. He wore overalls either with or without a shirt, and he had on cowboy boots with one leg in the boot and the other leg out, and he had on a Fat Albert hat that had the snaps in the front, looked like a Fat Albert hat. This is what my grandma and granddaddy looked like. But because they was watching my grandma and granddaddy, they seen my granddaddy swap my grandma's car out for a brand new red, small, it was like a medium-sized car. It was like a one of those small Cadillacs. It's exactly what it was, but it was red. And grandma absolutely loved this car. She would park her car in front of the junkyard and they washed her car every day, the people that worked at the junkyard. Now keep in mind, my granddaddy was proud of it, but see, my granddaddy had a prosthesis. But you couldn't tell he had a prosthesis because he never wore his cane and he walked the way he wanted to and he didn't give like no shits. He didn't care. And listen to me, he started to fight every day, all day, every day. He was never happy, but he was happy when grandma was off of his nerve about having a brand new car. These boys noticed the car. These boys noticed the car and they did not pay attention to Fred and Flora. Honey, listen, this being in the 90s, my grandma, like the early 2000s, I want to say. It was like going towards the end of the 90s, going on to 2000s. These boys chose to carjack my grandma and my granddaddy. When I say they tried to carjack them and wasn't prepared for what they wasn't prepared for, this is what happened. They started following my grandma and granddaddy. They locked the junkyard up. They started following my grandma and granddaddy from the junkyard all the way to Germantown. When they got to Germantown, my grandma noticed that the car was following them. Because my grandma noticed that the car was following them. Now keep in mind, my grandma is short. My grandma put the pedal to the metal and she started racing up to get to her house. My granddaddy was on the passenger side. This car was chasing them. And my grandma is speeding, which she was known for speeding. Keep in mind, my grandma got a ticket every week. But see, my grandma was the type that if you mess with Fred, you had to mess with Flora because she wasn't going for it. When I say she wasn't going for it, she didn't give a damn about nothing else but, listen to me, getting Fred to his destination. He had a prosthesis. But what they wasn't expecting was for my granddaddy to tell my grandma to slow the car down. When my grandma got to Lakeview is a street in Dayton that got a lake in the center of it. You can either go around it this way or around it this way. Either way, you had to go around the lake. They called it Lakeview. Honey, when my grandma slowed the car down, my granddaddy was pulling his gun from the side on his side. But listen to me. The window was rolled up. So by the window being rolled up and my granddaddy being of a nice size, he wasn't fat and he wasn't skinny. He was medium sized, but he was thick. Honey, by him having to go get the gun out and try to roll the window down, by the time the cars got to the side, my granddaddy couldn't get the gun out of his pocket and roll the window down simultaneously while sitting in the chair trying to do this. The window is rolled up. Because the window is rolled up, my grandma sees that the people are coming on the sides of her car. She see the boy on the passenger side pull his gun and tell her to pull over. By the time my grandma started hitting Lakeview, my grandma already had her pistol out and she shot the window out on the passenger side of her car, which shot into their window. When they realized that my grandma shot first, they stopped their car and immediately my grandma went past them. Now keep in mind, because it was such a close range, everything busted into the window and they was all cut up. My grandma and granddaddy was all cut up. My grandma never stopped her car. She got all the way to her house. She called her kids. They came up there and they took them in their car to Grandview. But see, that's not the good part. The good part is a week later. Now keep in mind, I told y'all this family had just moved into the neighborhood, which was out by my granddaddy's junkyard. My grandma and granddaddy knew exactly who did this. So the boys knew that my grandma and granddaddy knew this because the boys will walk past the junkyard every day to get to the store or to walk to Churches. They had to walk past or to go to Edison, which is the school up there. They had to walk past the junkyard to get there. So they had been watching them all this time. So they knew that my grandma and granddaddy knew exactly who they was. So they sent their dad down to the junkyard. When they sent their dad down to the junkyard, my grandma and granddaddy was down there, but the junkyard was full of people. This man walked up and asked my grandma and granddaddy what happened to her window. She was getting ready to get it replaced. Because when this Dumb and Dumber and Wheelchair Willie then was down there, when my granddaddy and this man start passing words, they were standing there. When they was standing there, that brought them to start getting upset and this and this. But my grandma standing off to the left of where my granddaddy is. Now it's a big commotion and this and this and this. My grandma was so smooth. She walked up, and when I say she slapped the shit out the man, she slapped the shit out of him, and she told them, leave it alone. She said, the next time your boys come down here, I'm going to shoot the shit out of them. It's what my grandma said. She said, because they could have killed us. From that point on, the boys never walked past my grandma and granddaddy. They never walked past my grandma and granddaddy. They never tried it again with my grandma and granddaddy. See, because my grandma and granddaddy, even though they looked like grandparents, my grandma and granddaddy was like Jay-Z and Beyonce, New Millennium. But at the end of the day, I don't know why these boys tried them, because I'm sure that they knew. My grandma and my granddaddy got into it with each other all the time. And they did. They got into it with each other all the time. But listen to me. You could not hurt them. They were like two peas in a pod. And they did not get along. None at all. Zero, not none. But at the end of the day, that was his wife. That was her husband. That's all they knew. But this is where this DNA is coming from with these people that I'm related to. It came from them too. See, now I'm putting the pyramid together for y'all so y'all can see where the creepiness come from. So my grandma and granddaddy never had to actually be watched. Now, they had another incident that happened, but it happened at the house. I'll have to tell y'all that in another story. But I just wanted to paint a picture of my grandma and granddaddy because, see, my grandma and granddaddy was totally different. They were different. And that's what makes us different. That's what makes us the product of them. Them two. That's what. Please be mindful in the comments about my grandma and granddaddy. Now, my grandma and granddaddy may have had their situations where they had to defend themselves, but that's still my grandma and granddaddy. And that's how I see them. That's the love that you see on my face. It's my grandma and my granddaddy. See, people can always say stuff about their grandma and granddaddy. My grandma and granddaddy was fantastic. They did shit that you would not believe. And that's what makes this story so unique to me. So, yeah, like, comment, and subscribe. And I thank y'all for being here for my first bedtime story. I'll see you in my next story. Bye.
And all men will change. But there's only one woman that we're going to change for. It's just one. We don't change for all women. We only change for one woman.